The EU is considering whether to label nuclear power as green. That could make atomic energy eligible for investments aimed at making the future carbon-free. And today is the last day for countries to object to the plan, which has been controversial from the start. Overall, 13 EU countries use nuclear power, generating just over a quarter of the bloc's electricity. But there are huge differences between countries. In recent years, France got almost 70% of its electricity from its 58 reactors. The share in Germany was down to 11% in 2020. And the government here is shutting down the last 3 remaining nuclear reactors this year. Belgium says it wants to phase out nuclear by 2025 and Spain by 2035. Meanwhile, France plans to ramp up, adding 6 new reactors. Slovakia and Finland are also building new facilities, and Poland has long said it wants to build its own. So this issue has exposed a fault line between the EU's major powers. Germany's position is largely that the risks of nuclear accidents outweigh the benefits of climate-friendly and reliable energy production. But the French and others say nuclear power must be an essential part of transitioning away from carbon-based fuels like coal.
Fukushima, a nuclear disaster that shook the world in 2011. And changed the way many people view nuclear energy. André Jacques says Fukushima mobilized him. The French anti-nuclear activist traveled to Japan after the catastrophe.
For me, this looked like the end of the world. From this moment on, I really asked myself about the risk that the population is exposed to, especially women and children, when living next to a nuclear reactor or other nuclear facilities, being exposed to possible nuclear accidents.
While some EU countries decided to phase out nuclear energy after Fukushima, France stuck to its nuclear tradition. More than 50 nuclear reactors are spread over the territory right now. Clearly a wrong choice, André Jacques says. The 70-year-old lives on a peninsula in Normandy, northern France, that is well known for its natural beauty and for its high number of nuclear facilities.
France derives about 70% of its electricity from nuclear plants, like this one here in Flamanville. EDF, Electricity of France, a largely state-owned company, operates these nuclear plants and says they are safe and strictly monitored.
Critics like André Jacques think differently.
The older nuclear power plants get, the higher the risk of accidents. You really cannot say they are infallible. Finally, nuclear power plants produce nuclear waste.
Here in La Hague, close to the activist's hometown, a plant processes nuclear waste. The factory is the region's biggest employer. At this local debate on further investments in nuclear power, residents also bring up the huge risks. But the company's spokesman says nuclear is better than gas and carbon.
We're facing a climate emergency and global warming, and even if nuclear power was not designed for this purpose, it now represents a huge advantage that it doesn't emit lots of greenhouse gases.
In its bid to become carbon neutral by 2050, France has already announced it will start building new nuclear power plants, despite criticism from some EU countries like Germany. Energy expert Nicolas Mazzucchi supports the French government's move.
The idea now is to develop reactors that can be produced on an industrial level in factories as automated as possible to make it cheaper and guarantee quality.
For André Jacques, new technical solutions are not the answer. He wants nuclear power to belong to the past, but France has already decided it will be part of its future.
So is nuclear power green or is it not? Let's bring in Volker Quaschning. He's a professor for renewable energy systems at the Berlin University of Applied Sciences and a campaigner for wind and solar energy. Mr. Quaschning, if the EU classes nuclear energy as green, Germany is against it, but it does look pretty isolated there, doesn't it?
No, not really. So we have a lot of countries in Europe, they don't have nuclear power, for example, Austria, Denmark, if you go to Norway. We have a lot of countries, they have no nuclear power. France, of course, they have a lot. And so it's a discussion. Germany is not isolated, clear.
If the EU classifies nuclear as green, are you worried there will be less funding available for projects with regard to solar and wind energy?
Yeah, it could be, because new nuclear power stations are very expensive. So you have to spend a lot of money. They are more than 3 or 4 times more expensive than investment in solar and wind energy. So if we are going to nuclear power, the money is missing for the renewables and to become carbon dioxide free. So for my opinion, it's no good idea to spend money in new nuclear power installations.
Talking about CO2, the nuclear proponents say that nuclear is nearly CO2 free and reliable and scalable. Shouldn't it at least be part of the solution in the fight against climate change for especially for an industrialized nation like Germany?
Yeah, we know that we need for most wind power and solar power for cover our future electricity and energy demand. So, and these technologies, they are fluctuating. So we have fluctuations in the energy supply, and nuclear power is not a very good option to cover the remaining energy supply, because nuclear power stations, yeah, they are produced to produce electricity all over the day continuously. And that's not possible in the future energy supply with a high share of solar and wind power. And for that, nuclear power is no option. And nuclear power is expensive. So it's really expensive. So we have expensive technology with high risk that's not very good compatible to supply with solar and wind power. And for that reason, it's better to go to renewable technologies.
Let's have a look at the future. In a study that you conducted in 2016, you found that the push for renewables needs to happen at around 4 to 5 times the speed that we are doing it now. If we are looking at a growing resistance against, for example, wind power in the countryside in Germany, do you think that's realistic, that we can scale up so massively?
Yeah, we have to do. If you look at that context, so nuclear power is also no option. So at the moment, nuclear power covers 3% of the German energy demand. So if nuclear power should make a part for climate protection, so we have to install 100 new nuclear power stations. So if the German people also are afraid of 100 or even more, and that's not possible, because we have also some problems to install wind power stations. You can imagine what will happen if the government decide to install new nuclear power stations. So it's a ridiculous discussion here.
What do you think, again, looking at the future, about the new generation of smaller nuclear plants that could even burn the existing nuclear waste that we have lying around?
These nuclear power stations only exist on paper. We have no real power stations. And we know that we have to become carbon dioxide free very fast. So in Germany, we have 15 to 20 years time to become carbon dioxide free. We have not the time to make experiments for another 10 or 15 years to look if these nuclear power stations may work. And then we need another 20 or 30 years to install a high number of nuclear power stations. This technology is too late. It's too expensive and too risky.
Volker Quaschning there. Thank you very much for your input.
You're welcome.
Well, Friday actually sees the end of a consultation on the EU's plans to label nuclear power and natural gas as well as green investments and open them up to more funding. So let's discuss the plans further with Claudia Kempfert from the German Institute of Economic Research. Thanks for joining us on DW Business. Can you first of all just explain to us why the European Commission feels it needs for natural gas and nuclear to be designated as green?
Well, first of all, we need a regulation that defines the requirements, what is really a financial product that is green and sustainable. And nuclear obviously is not green, it's risky, it's costly, and it's not sustainable at all. So, and on the other hand, also fossil natural gas is not sustainable because it creates high emissions, and both should not belong to this EU regulation or this taxonomy, because we need to channel the investments into renewable energy, into energy savings and electric mobility and all this. And both technologies, nuclear and fossil natural gas, hinder the transition. So that's why it's so important.
But the argument, of course, for both of those is that they are essential to getting us to a point where we have enough energy, we're emitting less carbon dioxide in the meanwhile, while we don't have the renewable sources to make up for it.
Well, the most important thing is that we have now to invest, because right now we have a certain share of nuclear and natural gas right now in the system, but it needs to be declined, because natural gas is too emission intensive and nuclear is too costly. It also takes a lot of time to construct the power plants. Look at the most recent buildings of these power plants. It takes a decade or more. We don't have this time. We need to invest right now into renewable energy, into really a green transition. And this is why it's so important to channel right now the investments into real future technologies and not those which hinder the transition.
Do you think there's a chance that the European Commission is rethinking this need to designate natural gas in particular as green, given the way that relations are going with Russia and the fact that it appears that natural gas is perhaps not the reliable, there's not this reliable stream of it that we thought there might have been?
Yeah, I would hope so, because right now, as you describe, Russia and the geopolitical risk we have right now, we have to reduce the share of natural gas in the system. So if Germany would really decline and would say this natural gas is not part of the EU taxonomy, and France, on the other hand, says nuclear is not, we would have the best solution, and hopefully this will happen, that they both agree in the middle, so to say, and then we would have an EU taxonomy which really drives the investments into a full renewable energy system, because that's the best system.
Well, the months ahead are going to tell us what the results of that consultation were. Claudia Kempfert, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.